Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. I'm joined today by Alexandra and she is going to be talking to you about growing a company test community, roles and paths for testers. Now this is a talk that Alexandra gave at the EuroSTAR conference 2016 very recently, and it was really popular, so we're delighted that Alexandra has agreed to come along and present it for you guys today. And if you enjoyed the webinar, make sure you head over to her on Twitter, because she's very quickly approaching her 1,000 followers and she's trying to get over the mark. So make sure you follow her on Twitter. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Alexandra about her presentation, just make sure you type them into the questions field there on your control panel. And at the very end of the webinar, then we'll go through your questions. So now let me hand you over to today's presenter, Alexandra. Hello, Alexandra.
Hello everybody, thanks Dara, and thanks for the shout out for my Twitter. It will be excellent for my ego. Also, it's a great way of giving me feedback after the webinar as well, which I'm also very excited to get. So thanks for joining me. My name is Alex. I work for Bradex here in Germany, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the things that we do to hire testers, what kind of testers we look for, how we train them, and how we foster a community to make sure that they all feel happy together and in their roles. I'm going to start just by giving you a couple of words about my background. So I come from actually a background in linguistics, but I fell into testing. I'm now head of test consulting and software quality at the company, and I'm also a product owner. The company that I work for, Bradex, we are based in Braunschweig. We're a software development company, so we do a lot of work for customers that need individual software writing for them. And we've also always had a strong focus on quality. So we've been around for 30 years, and for all of that time we've been really thinking about how can we make sure that what our customers get works correctly and that it's what they wanted or what they needed. So we have testing, we have training, we have development. We use various different tools. We write a tool ourselves, but we use a lot of open source stuff. And this is how our test community got started, because we needed testers and test consultants to be doing all of this wonderful testing work. So those are the introductions. What I want to do to start is to actually give you a little bit of an overview and insight into my problems. I want to sit down on the therapist's couch and tell you what problems somebody in my role might have with this kind of situation. So I have a team of 10 test consultants, and the first problem that we have is that you don't really get many ready-baked testers. University courses in testing, I don't think there are many, if any at all. People who do software engineering don't get much testing, and a lot of people have the very false idea that it's boring. So we have to work against that. And also it turns out that people from entirely different areas are good at testing and can be good at testing if you teach them and train them, but they're not ready-baked. So that's my first problem. My second problem is when we have a tester or a test consultant in a project, it can feel a bit lonely and on their own for them. We do integrate our testers and our test consultants into teams. We like having integrated testing, and they do work together with the development team doing coaching and training and lots of communication. Nevertheless, in comparison to developers who are maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, however many in a team, we often don't have more than one tester in a team. So making sure that they feel cared for and that there are people that they can talk to is something that's very important to us as well. And the third problem, if you're looking at this then from my perspective, is that in these kind of conditions, keeping the team together, even though they're spread out a little bit in different projects, making sure they're going in a similar direction, and making sure that nobody gets lost, that can feel a little bit like cat herding. And I want to show you a video of how that can sometimes feel. The video has decided to not work.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, It's just ripped to shreds, you know. You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like in the world.
So that's maybe a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but I hope that you get the idea of how I sometimes might feel trying to keep all of my cats or all of my testers together and making sure that they're going in the right direction. So after I've spoken to you now about my problems, I'd like to get onto the agenda of how we deal with them. So the first thing I'll talk about is the roles that we look for when we have testers and test consultants. So a bit of requirements engineering, what are we looking for? Then I'd like to talk to you about how we hire testers, how we train them, and how we make sure that they have a sense of community and a place to come and share ideas and grow as a community together. So I did mention on the first slide that I am also a product owner, so it makes sense for me if I'm looking for something to approach it from a what do I need or what do we want perspective. And the thing that we figured out is that there seems to be, at least for us, two main types or two main flavors of tester. We have our functional test consultants and our technical test consultants. And to be perfectly honest with you, those names maybe aren't the best ones because functional test consultant sounds like they have nothing whatsoever to do with technical things, and that's actually not true. All of our people are quite technical and become a lot more technical over the course of their career. But this is the words that we chose, and they work so far for us. So on the left-hand side, the functional test consultants, those will be people who are more likely to do a lot of work with requirements engineers or with a product owner, maybe also going out to customers, hearing things very, very early on in the process and talking about, well, how can this be tested? Are you sure that's what you want? Because it's not quite like this feature, which I know that we tested last week. And they really try and represent the user perspective in testing. They do a lot of exploratory testing. They are trained in session-based test management so that they can do nice sessions with teams and with customers as well. They are involved in automation. I don't have enough time to talk about what top-down and bottom-up mean in detail, but the idea is that they look at automation and doing test automation from test cases and what things that we need to do those test cases. So how am I actually automating my workflow? And they do mentoring and reviews within the team, with developers, with external people, and with new testers as well. On the other hand, we have our technical test consultants. They're more likely to be doing closer work with developers. When we say they look at the technical aspects of testing, that might be what kind of tooling are we using, how are we going to make this fit into our build pipeline, how can we get some cool reports from the data that we're doing. So they might be writing a lot of scripts, be it using AND or SQL, doing things that are going to support the process from that perspective. They are also, though, trained in exploratory testing, and they also use session-based test management. When they do automation, it's more likely to be more close to the tool and the tool APIs. So how are we actually going to automate our product as opposed to what tests we're going to automate with it. The important thing with these two things is that they are not set in stone. You'll hopefully notice that I've said closer work with developers and closer work with requirements engineers. We don't like to build up walls so that we say, only you can do this because you're a technical test consultant. People move slightly to the side, people have specific things that they're good at, that they want to get better at, but this helps us to define paths, and especially later for looking at the kind of careers that people can go on to do, to say, well, okay, what options do you have open to you or could be interesting for you? It helps us to have these two roles. So I'm going to assume that Pokemon is still cool. I'm still playing it. So I put together the kind of Pokemon that we're looking for when we say we're looking for a tester. And the name of this Pokemon is Skaska, and that stands for Super Communicative and Systematic Creative Applicant. I am aware that this is not the best name for a Pokemon, but bear with me. It turns out that these things, these three things, communicative competence, being systematic, and being creative, those are possibly the three most important things that if we can identify that in a candidate who maybe has never had to do anything with testing before, that is likely to be someone that we can train to be a good tester. And I want to go into that in just a little bit more detail. So when we talk about systematic approach, Obviously, for exploratory testing, being able to systemize things into models and being able to maybe explain those models, test them against an application, that's an important thing to do. Test automation is incredibly systematic, especially when we're splitting it between this top-down and bottom-up approach that I mentioned before, making sure that levels are communicating with each other on the correct, with correct interfaces is incredibly important. And there will be more things in there, but those are two examples. Creativity, incredibly important when you have new material or unknown material or something that's difficult or and risk that has never come up before. That happens to us all of the time as testers, and we have to be able to deal with those things creatively and not kind of just panic and say, oh, I've never seen this before, I don't know what to do with it. And the other thing is that sometimes we have fixed parameters. Sometimes we can't change this, and we have to make the best of that situation and do the best that we can for the team and the project, even though something can't change, and we have to be creative within that. Other things that I've got on this mind map, which are most certainly not everything, these are just some of the things that came to mind. A healthy dose of pragmatism, of curiosity, the ability to do that kind of work where you might be alone among a lot of people that you don't know and teaching them how to do things, so in a consultant role. What we definitely need is a growth approach to learning, so not the idea, I can't do that and I will never be able to do it, but I don't know how to do that yet, but show me and I'll try, and I think I can learn it. I'll talk about programming experience a bit later. For the technical test consultants, we do look for programming experience as a prerequisite. For the functional test consultants, they do some programming, but we teach them to do that, and I'll talk about that later. But the really, really big area, which is why communication comes first in my Skaska Pokemon, is communication. Because the way that we see the role of a tester is not just somebody who gets something thrown over to them at the end or very late, hey, I've developed this, you know, go for it, have a look, see what you can find. We want them to be involved as early and as often in the process as we possibly can, and making sure that other people are being involved in the test and quality process as well. If you have one tester in a team with 5 developers, that's not going to happen that one person can test everything. So you're having to do coaching and pairing. Maybe you're teaching people. Maybe you're consulting the project manager about how the test strategy should be implemented. We're talking to users or the testers, people who are on the development team, maybe managers from the company. And we're talking on very, very, very different levels. On the one hand, we need to be able to give fact-based information, but we also need to be very open to the social and emotional levels of communication, because a lot of the things in projects, when things are stressful, they can get quite to an emotional level, and we need to be aware of that and able to communicate on those levels too. We're talking about different things. We need testers to be able to talk about requirements. We need them to be able to go into a lot of detail, but they also need to understand and communicate abstract concepts to people who don't need all of the details. So communication is the big thing that testers and potential testers need. And I don't think it's something that you can't train, but I would rather have an applicant who is very, very, very communicative on these levels that we can train to be a tester than try and train somebody who is not very communicative to be communicative. That's not currently within my realms of ability. So we know what we're looking for, and we know what kinds of skills and characteristics we're looking for. So when we get an application coming in, it's a little bit like Schrodinger's tester, which is why I have another picture of a cat. So the potential tester could be good, could also not be good. And here on this slide you can see a few of the areas that people come from. So for our functional test consultants, we have biologists, sociologists, chemists, linguists. We actually have a great deal of doctors as our functional test consultants. I don't know if there's a pattern there, but we do definitely have a few. So these are people that have obviously learned to think very systematically, and if we can identify that they are communicative as well, then that's often a very good sign. I don't want to say that every biologist that applies to be a tester will definitely be a good one, but we've had some good experiences with people on that left-hand side. For the technical test consultants, They are usually people that come from a background in business information systems. For any German speakers amongst you, that's Wirtschaftsinformatik. Mathematicians we've had as well. So usually people that do have some kind of a background and have done some programming, because the expectation and the desire for them is that they can take tools and maybe implement them and get to grips with them quite quickly. So we have an applicant. We decide that we want to take a look at them. And then we do an interview. The aim for us in the interview, and the aim is very, very easy to write on a slide, but actually it's quite difficult, is to find out whether the applicant has the potential to be trained as a test consultant, because the training is something that we do, and we need to find out if we think that that's likely to work. So how do we do that? The way that we do that is we split up the interview into basically two parts. The first thing that we do with the applicant is to give them two exercises. They get 45 minutes roughly for both of them, and so there's an aspect of time management in that as well. We do say that you should do both exercises, not just focus on one, and so that's a little test for us in terms of time management. And one of the exercises is on exploratory testing. Obviously we don't say this is an exercise on exploratory testing because they might not know what it is. We want them to approach the problem systematically and creatively and then to communicate about what they found out. And I'll go into that in just a second. And the second exercise is reading an article that they probably won't have had anything to do with, and that they have to give us a resume and answer some questions. And then we have a normal conversation and discussion. So the whole thing takes about 2 hours. So the first thing that we give them is a small time tracking tool, which is reasonably easy to understand, we hope, but not so easy that we actually haven't had people not manage to do the questions. So it seems to be quite a good bar of showing us whether people can shine or whether people have really had some problems with this. And we have a set of questions that the applicant knows that they're going to get, and we have some questions for us that we can ask and expand on if those questions go well, or if they go badly, or if we end up going in a different direction. So it's things like, what does the application do, who could use it, what would be important to test, and then we explain that there's never enough time to test everything, so what kind of priorities could be defined and how could they be determined. And then we also ask them if they found any problems. In an earlier version we did actually build some problems in, but now we just use the normal version and see what problems they find, and they do find some. And we also ask them how they rate the usability. That's just thinking a little bit further than pure functionality of whether something works, and we like to hear what they have to say about that as well. And I want to share with you some of the things that I see as good or bad when we're talking about this exercise. So what I like to hear is, I'm not sure whether this is a problem, but I noticed. So obviously at this stage people are a little bit more hedging about, this is definitely an error, this is a terrible error. But they tell us that they noticed something and they're unsure whether it's a problem, but they think it's worth talking about. I take that as a good sign. We did have somebody say that they didn't have all the requirements, so they couldn't test, and that was unfortunately a bit of a bad sign, because we don't often have, well, I don't think we've ever had all of the requirements. I don't think it's possible to have all of the requirements in a project, so we need more creativity than that. People who say yes, the customer or the stakeholders could help us to identify priorities, that's good. People who are able to tell us what they expected and when that diverged from what they actually saw, so they're capable of separating what they thought might happen and being able to say why they thought that might happen and what actually happens. There are some people, like I said, sometimes we've wondered if the application is too easy, but every so often we get candidates who just don't understand it full stop whatsoever, so we still think it's quite a good application. People who go a little bit further than the application, they check on the console, they check the documentation and the help. If we say to them, how did you approach the application? A good start is people say, well, the first thing I did was to open the help and to read through what it roughly said I could do. That's a good source. We did have somebody who did not see the exercise. That was a bit of a bad one. It was on the other side of the piece of paper. We had somebody who left while they were doing the exercise, so like I say, so the bar, it does set quite a good bar. People who take notes, we don't read the notes and we don't collect them, but when I can see people who have made some notes and they go back and check them, that is a good sign for me, because it means that they're not just keeping everything in their head and that they have a systematic way of dealing with the results they got. And this is one of the harder questions we ask. We ask what other priorities you might be able to define if it was a different type of software, and if people are capable of saying, well, we have different priorities if this was for a plane or for the medical services or the knitwear for something like a time tracker, then that's obviously shows that they're able to think differently in different contexts, and that's going to be good for project situations. Oh yeah, and I didn't have time, shows a lack of time management skills, even though we were very, very clear about having to do both of the exercises. So the second exercise that we have is, it's a German article, and most of, I think about 99% of our applicants tend to be German, so we've never had a problem with that. And it's an article that we know quite well because it's something that I wrote a few years ago, and it's about test automation. It's about the tool that we develop as an open source tool, and it's got things on test design, agile processes, component recognition algorithms in it. So it's likely to be more technical than they've dealt with before. And the questions that we ask aren't necessarily, you don't just have to go and find the right paragraph and then highlight the answer. They are not the easiest questions, but that is exactly why we've chosen them, because we want to see how they deal with subject matter that is not going to be very familiar to them, and how they can communicate that back, whether they can say sometimes, I didn't get that answer, or I think this. Those are situations that you can find yourself being in as a tester or test consultant, and it's important to be able to deal with them as well as with new subject matter. So that's our second exercise. Then we come to the conversation. We do, I think, the pretty standard stuff with talking about the company, what they know about them. As a general hint, there are some people that come to interviews without having even looked at the company website, which is a pretty bad sign. I wouldn't do that. Talking about the person themselves, how they got to where they are, what motivates them, what interests them in the area of IT and testing, any questions about the CV, and then we move on to the exercises, and that discussion can be quite long or quite short, depending on how it's going. We've had some really, really good discussions with people about how they've done the exercises and the things they've found. Those are the particularly fun ones. And then the third part that we do is, because a lot of these people won't know a great deal about testing, to ask them what they think the job will be like, and then we tell them what the job looks like from our perspective, and the kind of training that they will get, so that they know, does this fit for me? Is this a fit for me? Can I imagine that? Usually they are indeed about the same, but it's nice to be able to talk about the details. So we have interviewed and found an applicant. We say yes, you can have a job, and the first 6 months for both of the roles is usually quite similar, because even if people have come from a technical background, the likelihood that they will have done a lot in the area of software testing is reasonably minimal. And we have 3 lines that we follow. We have theory, we have practice, and we have a social aspect as well. Let me start with talking about the theory. So we do a lot of theoretical stuff. We start by giving them the Software Tester Basics book, the ISTQB book, and one of the first things that we do ask them to do within the first few months is to do their foundation level certificates. Just to be pretty clear about this isn't because we think that once they've read or done that they are then the best tester in the world and we can send them off to projects and everything will be fine. We put it at the beginning because it's something to give them a very good basic knowledge and vocabulary that they can build on, and the reason that we have theory going hand in hand with practice, which you'll see later on in a second, is so that they can start to gain some real project experience to compare and contrast with the theory. So we find it a useful tool, but as you can see, even in the theory we do a great deal of other things as well. One of the things we've just started doing, and if you've never heard of it, I can highly recommend going and looking at it, is the 4-hour tester. The newest addition to our team is also doing that. There are exercises in exploratory testing and modeling and things like that. He's finding that a really nice comparison and contrast to reading quite a theoretical book. We introduce them to the test tool that we use in-house, which doesn't require programming skills, but we also give them a course on Java for testers, which I'll show an example of in just a second. The idea being that not everybody who is a tester will need to be able to code at a level that you can say, okay, I could develop software, but an affinity or not being afraid of it anymore and being able to do things at quite a high level is a big advantage, and we're finding that everyone that we've given the Java for Testers course to, they're doing really, really well, and actually some of them want to learn a great deal more of it, which is cool if they want to. I highly recommend to them that they play Code Combat, which is actually one of the languages in Python, but it's a great way of becoming less afraid of dealing with program and program code. And we give them workshops on exploratory testing, about the test automation patterns that we use, and depending on the context and on the person, they might get some insights into continuous integration and build pipelines. That's the theory. At the same time as the theory is going on, I promised I would show you an example of Java code. So as you can see, this is the kind of high-level stuff that somebody who is a functional test consultant or working at the quite high level of automation is likely to deal with. We have a test case, it has an ID, it has a name, and it's reasonably easy to read what it does. We check something exists, we delete it, and then we check that it doesn't exist anymore. And even at the level below that, the keywords and the modules and the methods are named in such a way that they are very logical and functional, and this is working really, really well for us. So, at the same time as all of the theory is going on, we are also continually doing more and more practice. We don't just do a big theory block and then a big practice block. We try and mix things in. So the order of when they get the exploratory testing workshop and start doing some exploratory testing, that might not be the same for every person, but we use it as a checklist to make sure that everyone has gone through roughly the same things by the end of the first 6 months. I think the most important thing in the practice is that every person that starts in our team gets a mentor. The mentor is the first person they can go to when they have questions about test theory. That person organizes any practice things that they themselves can't deliver, either because it's a skill they don't have yet or don't have at all, or because their project team can't give that. So this person is the main person that they go to talk testing about on various different levels. We try and get them in a project team in the best case scenario with their mentor as soon as we possibly can, even if they're just shadowing and listening for the first time. Because later on they're going to start doing more and more small and then bigger and then even bigger tasks within that team, be it could you test this, or could you review the test results, could you take a look at this, I'd like your opinion, onto actually doing test specification, doing test automation, and doing exploratory testing as part of features or releases. We do encourage them to have their work reviewed. I say encourage there, that's more than an encouragement. What we do encourage them to do is to review other people's work as quickly as possible, because that's just as important for them to get the practice in a safe environment for when they do that, maybe at external customers. And of course they learn about development processes, be they agile or waterfall, depending on the project, and we give them supporting information on that. I'm going to talk about the social aspects later on. What I want to be quite concrete about is that after 6 months of doing theory and practice and projects, that does not mean that we are at the super duper tester, that everything is done. The investment, that's the correct word, the investment is continuous. 6 months isn't the after that you are completely trained. This is the basic time that we figure it takes to do these things and to get people up to speed on most of the basic concepts. When it gets to further on after your first 6 months, after a few years, then it's important for us, for the people in the company, that they know what kind of directions that they can go in. Some people say, hey, I'm super happy being a test consultant, I like having different projects, or I like being on the same project. Some people say, I'd like to go in the direction of being a test manager or a senior consultant, someone who can go to external customers and be helping with the tough projects or more difficult or new situations. On the functional test consultant side, we do see people going a lot into requirements engineering or into user experience, and on the technical test consultant side, maybe looking at more non-functional aspects of testing, doing some load and performance testing, or maybe going closer and closer into release engineering or continuous integration, continuous deployment. regardless of the role that you have in the team, it might also be the case that you say, hey, the thing that I really, really like doing is giving trainings, so I'm going to specialize in being a trainer. It might be that you are super hot about test automation patterns and practices for doing that right, so you start to work more with those. You might say, I like mentoring, I want to look at specific tools or specific methods. We try and leave a lot of ways open as well for personal preference, because if people are working on something that they feel personally excited about, then that's usually a better way of doing things. So there's a lot of ways to develop once you've had your first few years of experience. The most important thing with these things is, first of all, to actually communicate with the people about what interests them, what doesn't interest them. We have one person who's a functional test consultant, and my expectation was, oh, sure, they like requirements engineering, and this person said, no, do you know, I actually really don't like that. I prefer to do something else. I prefer to do more coordination of test management. Okay, if I hadn't asked that, I might have sent that person to a requirements engineering training. So communication and being available to talk to about people's roles and what excites them and what doesn't excite them is an incredibly important point, as is the point investment. I think in the talk at EuroSTAR, I mentioned that there's a quote, and I honestly don't know who it's from, but it isn't from me, the idea of what happens if we train our people and they then leave. And the question you should ask is, what if we don't train them and they stay? So investing in people and communicating with them are two things that are incredibly important, not just for the first 6 months, but through their entire career. So I promised I'd talk about the social aspects, and the message that I want to give here is that you can belong to a team even if you're alone. I said at the beginning that a tester might be the only tester within a development team, and that can feel quite alone. You know, who can I talk to, who can I go to, who can I ask if I have a question, who can I spar with to deal with ideas, and that's very much the social aspect of the community that we try to foster here. So here is our banner for social things. A big part of the social aspect is indeed the mentor. So the mentor becomes your first person that you go to, but the idea is that shouldn't be the only person that you can go to. We try and have a welcome event, so going out and getting some food, or going for lunch, meeting up after work as soon as we can when we get new testers in the team, so we get that social aspect going. And the company is quite good in that we have a meetup of the whole company for 1 hour a week, where on a roll through everybody over the year, people present what they're doing in projects or what they've learned or a new technology. So there's a feeling of belonging to the whole community. But what we do on a smaller level, just for the test team, is to make sure that we also have a weekly test meetup, and I'll talk about that in just a second. That is also an hour, and that's where we talk amongst ourselves about test topics. One thing that I like to do, which I started about 6 months ago, is I call it the index check, and I will tell you about that in just a second as well. And then we do things like peer reviewing, so cross-project reviews. Once a month, people go and have something reviewed by somebody else, and they review something by someone else as well. So you have this knowledge transfer and this communication between the whole team, that they always know who they can go and ask about a specific problem. We do team events, Christmas markets, going and having food together. They will have team events within their projects as well. And what we like to do within the team is to do a lot of co-working, pairing, co-writing. So if somebody is writing a blog and it's the first time they've done it, then write it together, because pairing takes away the fear of doing something for the first time, and then as well you have two people that know about it, at least a little bit. So at the test team meetup, this happens once a week. Our aims are to make sure that people are empowered to learn and to share things. So we encourage them to choose a topic that they like. It could be, I want to read this book and then present it to you. I want to talk about design patterns. I saw a tool, or I've had an experience. If they've been to conferences, that they give a talk about that. If they have a question about something that actually we'd always decided that we're going to do this way, and something new happens, then we have a discussion about it. And the aim there is to really encourage them to have a certain amount of autonomy of what they can work on, how they can present it, and some variety as well, which is important for keeping people happy. It's also a way of transferring knowledge and knowing who knows what. So if we give a talk about, somebody gives a talk as an introduction to continuous integration, then everybody knows that that person knows about that, and everyone has a little bit more knowledge about it than they maybe did before they went in. And it's a good way of creating responsibility and co-responsibility. We are quite, I would say, we're a self-organized team. So if somebody has a topic, they take responsibility for it. They find someone to pair with it on. They coach each other. And it becomes less scary to do these things the more often that they do them. And that is good training and good practice for being out at customers. That's how I keep my head together. And the personal contact, I would say that this is also it's one of my favorite parts of my job, being able to connect with people on this kind of a level, and it's incredibly important. So I have a one-on-one conversation either every 2 weeks in those first 6 months, or once a month once they're out of that stage. And the idea is that this isn't the only time that they can come to me, but the idea is that to show that we have a trust, a basis of trust, that if there is something that comes up in the meantime, that they know that my door is open. And that seems to be working quite well. So we definitely have our meetings once a month, and I have 2 main questions. I want to know what their happiness index is. Are they happy? Are they frustrated? And that can obviously that can depend very much on the day, but if you do that kind of a conversation every month, then you have an opportunity to see where the tendency is going and to deal with things that can be dealt with before they get to too much of a problem. And the other thing that I like to ask is how challenged they are. Are they too challenged? Are they not challenged enough? Is it just right? One of my colleagues has a great model where he says, okay, you have your comfort zone, and then you're just outside of your comfort zone, and then you're in your panic zone. And being in your panic zone is, for too long, is kind of dangerous. So we try and make sure that people aren't bored, but also that they're not panicking. And a lot of the ideas that go into this index check that I do came from a book I read by Daniel Pink called Drive, and making sure that people have autonomy, that they can get better at things, and that they know the purpose. So we have a good open conversation about how they're working and how they feel about it. And if you haven't read that book, I can highly recommend it. It really did change my life. That sounds a little bit maybe over-exaggerated, but it's true. So, finishing up, coming to the results. We have a team of 10 people. I think 3 years ago the team was only 2 or 3 people, so we've done a fair bit of growing. And it's incredibly pleasing to see that it is a team where we do have a common understanding and a way of talking to each other and a common way of thinking and dealing with testing. Nevertheless, discussion is encouraged. We're not dogmatic. We don't say, this is the way that we figured out we were going to do it, and we're only ever going to do it like this. We look at things based on their context, based on new information, and we discuss about them and try to come to consensus where we can. We have a lot of self-organization and empowerment, so letting people choose things, work on things, and finding things out that then help them and give them experience for in their projects. And what we've seen happening even in the past 3 years, like I say, one person is currently working as a requirements engineer as opposed to a tester, but obviously everything that this person has from testing he is bringing to requirements engineering, and I think that that's a really cool thing. We've been doing consulting for external people who have heard that we know cool stuff and that they might want to learn it too. We've gone from not having any Selenium projects to building up a base of Selenium expertise and doing a lot of Selenium projects and consulting. People going to conferences, not just me, other people on the team as well, going to conferences and talking about what they're doing. And we have one person who has gone on to become a project lead for a project. So exciting developments. I have to figure out where I'm going to get more testers from, but it's good to see that people are being able to follow their careers and follow their journey, having come from testing and having been being allowed to do that. So I want to leave you with 3 takeaways, and if they're the only things that you take with you from this, then that would be awesome. I think it's important to think about what skills or characteristics you need, which ones you don't want to train, and which you can and need to train. So, like I said, communication is something that I would say we need. We need to be people to be super communicative. We can train them in a lot of other things, but communication is something that we don't want to have to train them in. Continuous investment, I would say, is important for any roles that you have in your company, investing in people is important, but most especially if you're actually training them to do the thing that you want them to do, then investment, it is going to cost, but it will reap benefits. And invest continuously, not just in the first few months. And I think the very most important thing is that communication and community are the most important things that you can foster. The days when I feel I've done a good job is when I realized that the environment was such that people could work in a good way and we could communicate about it, and if there were problems then we managed to get them out of the way. So actually the human factors of dealing with people and reacting to people on that very human level are so important. Again, not just in testing and all of IT, but testing is the area that I get to play with the most. So those are my takeaways. Thank you very, very much for listening, and I think we can go back to Dara for the questions.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that presentation. And just before we have a look at those questions, I'm going to go through one or two slides here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to mention that we have another webinar coming up next month with Daniel Billing. Daniel was another speaker at the conference this year, and he is going to be talking about enabling a security testing mindset, a guide for leaders, coaches, and managers. And the call for submissions to speak at the EuroSTAR Conference 2017 in Copenhagen is now open. So you can find out all the information about that on the EuroSTAR website. We have another conference as well coming up next year called EuroSTAR, which is a two-day conference that will be running in London. It's the first EuroSTAR that we've ever held, and there's some really great speakers lined up for you. And if you want to find out more about the program and the different speakers, then head over to the EuroSTAR website. The URL is there. And we have an offer running until this Friday where you can get 2 tickets for the price of 1. And I know I've shared with you a number of different pieces of information there, but in the follow-up email that you're going to get after this webinar, you'll get all the links to the various pages. So now let's have a look at some of your questions. And there's a few here. So the first question I have for you, Alexandra, is 1 tester to 5 developers a good ratio?
Oh, I'm going to give my favorite answer and say it depends. No, I will say what it depends on. So I think I have seen teams that really embrace the whole team quality, where that kind of setup works very well. And in that setup, I would less say that the test person is a tester and more of a test consultant. They are somebody who is helping to coach the team and assist the team in being high quality and doing things. So that means that developers will probably also be testing, also helping with automation, and that the tester won't be taking everything on their back. I think that in a situation where you have basically 5 developers against 1 tester, that you might end up with some problems. Like I say, it's going to depend greatly on the project and on the context, but I prefer a whole team approach. I think the difficult or the sad thing is that sometimes, this is something we're still working on in the industry, I think, is that sometimes you basically have to do the best with what you get in the project. So sometimes you only have enough budget for 1 tester, and that's better than having no testers, and it's not as good as having 3 testers, and the question is how are you going to make that work, which is why it's so important for us when we're talking about our test consultants to make sure that they're not just focused on I'm actually doing some dynamic testing of something that somebody has just given to me and I'm involved in the whole thing. I hope that helps to answer the question.
Another question here asks, how do you decide who you're going to call to a technical interview? Do you conclude it based on CV only?
Sometimes from the CV alone we can see, yes, this is someone that we think has good potential. What I didn't mention is that I'm not the only person that looks at the CVs. There are 2 or 3 other people, and I think that the combined experience of looking at CVs and cover letters and references and things, that usually gives us I wouldn't want to quantify it, it's a gut feeling, but what we sometimes do if we have questions is that I will do a call with the person first just to ask a few questions, and then we can and then we can make a decision. We do tend more towards interviewing a candidate if we're not sure than not interviewing them, because, like I say, it's about realizing potential, and that's very, very hard just to see on paper. So sometimes we will have quite a lot of interviews where we say, none of them were relevant for us, but that actually goes into our experience so that our next gut feelings maybe get a little bit better.
Next question here asks, do you ever hire anyone that already has test experience, and how does this affect the first 6 months?
So we would do it. It's not something that we don't say we just want newbies. It's never happened so far that we have had someone that has had a lot of test experience. I think we've had somebody that already had the ISTQB. Okay, that doesn't make a big difference. And I think that even if they did have testing experience, we would still give them a mentor, and we would still give them workshops in the way that we do things here. And then I would be excited and interested to see what happened, because on the one hand, we need people to have this common understanding. This is how we've found it good to work in our projects. But if they can bring new things in, then we would all profit from that, and that would be awesome. So I would never say that that's not going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet.
Another question here asks, how would you scale this to larger companies? What additional testing roles, levels would you foresee as needing to deal with?
So one of the things that I can imagine, especially if you're working within teams that are maybe where some people are remote, distributed is the word that I'm looking for, in distributed teams, is that you might need a lot more roles that are doing things like doing things that are a lot more of glue and doing those very human factors with relevance and with relation to testing to make sure that everyone's doing well together. You might also need some people who are a lot more specialized in specific areas. With a team of 10, we try not to have just one specialist, which obviously there are people that when you say, well, that's going to be the best person for the job here. But in a much bigger team, you might have someone, okay, these 3 people are our performance specialists, and they jump into projects when we need the performance specialist. I can imagine that as well. In terms of the communication, what my job might look like in 5 or 10 years when everything has grown a lot bigger, I would kindly ask Derek to let me do a webinar in 5 or 10 years so I can explain that. I think that the communication factor becomes possibly more difficult, and yet even more important to have that trust and openness. I don't know how I would deal with that yet. Come back in 5 years, I think. I would feel not good about giving suggestions of something that I haven't had any experience on yet.
Okay, and the next question here, it says, you mentioned both waterfall and agile projects. How is it decided which methodology is followed in a project?
So as a company, we prefer to do agile projects, not just because it's the cool, well, I don't think it's even the cool new thing, but not because it's the cool and newer thing, but because most of the projects that we're working on fit very nicely into this. There's the graph of how technically unsure, how unsure are we about the requirements, and we don't do a great many projects where we are 100% sure about everything. So most of them would be a good fit for agile in that sense, but it also depends a great deal on the customer. Agile, to do a proper and a good agile project, the customer needs to be aware of their rights and their responsibilities, and that isn't always the case. What we tend to do is be as agile as we possibly can within the grounds and the parameters that we're given. So as an example from testing, even if the project itself is going to be given over to some external company's QA later on, or if they're going to do their final test phase, we still do automation, do testing, exploratory testing in our development phases, be they sprints or whatever you call them, encourage the developers to be testing as well, and we are as agile as we can possibly be within the parameters. So the decision, I'd love to say that this decision is always based on, is this project suited for agile or not, but sometimes it's also to do with what the customer is basically encouraging or making us do. But that's part of being creative within a set of parameters, being as agile as you can and profiting from as much as you can, even if the project itself isn't agile.
Another question here says, how easy is this to manage when the team you manage is located in different locations and some of your third-party test team do not use exploratory testing?
Oh, two questions. So I would say that the first one, the first part of it is probably more difficult, because I think that, and I can't emphasize this enough, the fact that I try, or that we do talk to each other on various levels, one-to-one in groups, about various different things, that is one of the high success factors of any team. I think there's even there's a Google study or something about the teams that perform the best are the ones where people feel safe or something to that effect. So that communication is so important, and obviously that gets harder the further away people are. And one of the things that I've heard about projects that have large outsourcing parts is that the best way to deal with that is to make sure that people are traveling regularly to see each other, which obviously makes the project more expensive, and then you won't get your very, very low what's what I'm looking for, hourly rates, but it's just an important thing for the project. If some of the people aren't using exploratory testing, one thing I did a couple of years ago was to kind of hand select about half of the developers in the company and give them exploratory testing workshops. That didn't make exploratory testers out of all of them, but it did mean that they understood why it was important. And now I see a lot of teams doing sort of exploratory testing days using session-based test management, either with their test consultant or with a borrowed one. I would say that sometimes education is key, and especially telling them why it's important. If you can get across to them that you can only write a test against something that you know is a risk, but you will never find the gaps like that, then that's a good way of making them aware of the fact that they might have to go and look outside the lines and look at things that they haven't already written down.
The next person here is asking, well, actually they start by saying, I think you're lucky for growing from 3 to 10 testers in a short time. What's your tester-developer ratio, and what do you recommend I do to convince my boss we need more testers? And this person here mentioned as well that they have a current ratio of 1 to 5, and their bosses believe that this is okay figure. Have you any thoughts on this?
So in our company has about 80 people, of which about 60 are developers and about 10 are testers. But we work with a lot of different companies on different projects, so the ratio is not always quite as good as it sounds. But gosh, that's a really tough one. So one of the first very pragmatic things that I would do is, in the situation that you are now, to make sure that there is to aim for a switch in focus between the tester in the team is the person that does everything to the whole team is responsible for quality. Like by training the developers in exploratory testing, by pairing with them on some things, by helping out, by saying, hey, is there any way we could do some more automation of this part or of this part? This would save all of us time. I said in another talk, one of the best things about developers that I have realized so far is that if you make them do something twice, then they will already start looking ways to automate it and to make it more streamlined. So all you have to do is ask them for a build twice, and they'll be like, fine, I will automate it. That's just a really great thing about them. So I think in the situation that you're in now, trying to make the best of it and trying to spread that testing load and becoming more of a consultant in the team, that's not going to happen overnight, but becoming more of a consultant in the teams. And in terms of, convincing, again, it's not something that I can say from experience, because I am in the super, super, super lucky position that my company understands that this is an important thing that we need to have. I don't want to suggest bribery, but I think maybe if you can start to show some pilot projects and examples of things where having a tester or having more test activities has done well, that they will want more of that. People react very, very well to examples, and experiments instead of just theory. So I understand that that's not going to be the answer that you can just run with and it's fixed, but I hope it helps a little bit.
The next person here is asking, what's the best way to review the work of other testers, especially in an agile project? And they say, the same person says, I sometimes just work alone in a smaller agile team.
Mm-hmm. So if you have anyone that is not in the project that you can ask to take a look, who is also a tester and knows the kind of things that are important to you, those would be my first choice, especially because that kind of situation can really open your eyes to, if you've been blinkered because of a problem that your project was having, then somebody coming and taking a fresh look, you'll be like, oh, of course, I didn't think of that. Otherwise, I mean, grab your favorite developer, and the way of doing that is, at least in my experience, is to hear bribery with biscuits, tea, sweets, and various things like that work. You know, and asking nicely, saying, you know, I could really do with somebody taking a look at this, seeing what you think of it. I've got a couple of things. Developers do that amongst themselves all the time, and I think that if you explain why you'd like the support and the help, then they should be they should want to help, and if they can't or they don't want to, then that might be something that you can raise as a hindrance in a retrospective, because if it is a good agile team, they will want the team to gel and to be sharing knowledge and doing things together.
How do testers engage with outside customers?
I think, well, it kind of depends when we get called in. Sometimes in some projects we will be a part of a team that is responsible for doing some pre-release testing. So basically, where the things that have everything that's happened before with integrated testers, they might have had testers, they might not have had any, and basically we're doing the very traditional pre-release tests. And on things like that, the likelihood that you're interacting with the customer directly is maybe reasonably slim. And what we try to do in situations like that is to come with the things that we know about. Okay, we have all of these maybe manual test cases, but have you thought of doing some exploratory work as well? And so sometimes that reaches the customer, they go, hey, that was a cool idea. In other things, we basically, in the same way as we do development, we basically try and hear what the customer's problems and risks are, listen to them, suggest sometimes strongly where we think that the customer might need to be doing something else, and give them reasons for that, maybe give them examples as well. And if otherwise, we adapt ourselves to the project and to the customer and to the context, and do the best and most professional job that we can do. That's, again, it's very abstract, but it depends on making sure that the customer knows about quality and has awareness for it as part of our role. So we do try and do things that, like, here are some reports, here is some information, making sure that we talk to the customer about it. But in some projects, you don't have that kind of access. So again, it will depend. But always communicating, always trying to make sure that people are aware and that there's an open communication culture.
Okay, I think we've just run out of time there, Alexandra, so perhaps we might just take one last question and leave it at that.
Sure. Okay.
And this person here is asking, what if you met a candidate during the interview process with high social skills and functional testing experience that you requested earlier, but a big lack of technical skills?
Oh, that's if there's a lack of technical skills, absolutely no problem. I'm a living, breathing example of somebody who can come from literally only thinking that computers came with Windows. I couldn't figure out that there might be other operating systems, to being actually a reasonably technical person. I can talk with developers and hold my own. That is something that if you're willing and if you have that growth mindset, that you can definitely learn that. If I have someone, and I have had an example of this, of someone who has said, okay, I can do this, this, and this, and I know about this, but I can't learn to program. That is not a growth mindset. That is I've decided that I can't or I don't want to, and that's slightly less useful, because even if you're not doing very technical things as a tester, you are always having to learn new things and new processes and new customers and new teams. So we need people to think like that. So a lack of technical knowledge is definitely not something that we say that's a killer. Trying to think of the English word. It's a KO criteria. Is that? It's not something that we would say that's the reason why it's never going to work. Like I say, a lot of our functional test consultants come from backgrounds like biology or sociology, things like that. So all of the technical stuff they learn on the job and by doing things and experience things and by talking and asking.
All right, thank you very much, Alexandra, for that presentation. We're going to wrap it up there with that, and we want to thank all of our attendees today and for all of your questions. And it's been a really popular webinar. There's lots of compliments in there, and I know there was a lot of compliments as well at the conference that said it was a great talk.
Thanks, Dara.
If you've any further questions for Alexandra, you can catch her on Twitter, and I know she's very close to her 1,000 followers on Twitter. I think it was 998 the last time I checked. So if you're on Twitter, follow her there. Put a big smile on her face. This webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to find it on Huddle very shortly, and you will get a follow-up email from me in about an hour's time with the links to where you can access this recording, as well as where you can check out the call for submissions for EuroSTAR 2017 and all the information about UKSTAR. So that's it from us here today. Take care, everybody, and we hope to see you at future webinars.